Most of the history of the Persian Empire is relatively unknown to Western civilization. The Greco-Persian conflicts and the conquests of Alexander the Great are often the only studied fields of interest. On this channel, I have already covered the very beginning of the first superpower in human history, with King Cyrus and later Darius the Great. We are now in the year 486 BC, and Xerxes, the eldest son of Darius and Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, inherited all lands from the Indus Valley to Macedonia. The Persian Empire at this time was perfectly structured and organized, with a military force greater than any other on the planet. Rivaling the status his father possessed was not easy for Xerxes, but there was one task in which he had a chance to surpass him, something Darius had failed to do at Marathon: to subdue the Greek states. The planned invasion of Greece was postponed for the time being. Before moving forward, Xerxes first had to quell rebellions in Egypt, then in Babylon. The king, it appears, was at best lacking in the grace and wisdom of his forebears. He invaded the Nile Delta and, even more insultingly, melted down the statue of Marduk revered by the Babylonians. This was an especially grievous affront to Babylonian dignity and tradition, as one of a ruler's religious duties was to grasp Marduk's hands during the New Year's festival to ensure continued success and prosperity throughout the lands. Whereas his father and grandfather declared themselves emperors of the whole Persian Empire, Xerxes considered himself only king of the Persians and the Medes. At the same time, men from all corners of the empire were being rounded up, and arms were being manufactured in an attempt to construct the most formidable landing force in the history of mankind. According to Herodotus, Xerxes left Sardis with over 2 million soldiers and 4,000 ships, but even more realistic counts used by many scholars estimate an army of 360,000, supported by a navy of 750 ships. Xerxes was not as barbaric and arrogant as he is commonly portrayed. His plan for conquest was well thought out and planned. In order to move his army and supplies safely across to Europe, he had hundreds of ships moored side by side, each with 2 bridges built, connected with ropes and wooden planks, and a covering of earth on top to give a smooth, solid crossing. The first bridge soon collapsed in a large storm, and Xerxes became furious as the loss of these ships was important to his plans. In fact, he reportedly ordered that the sea be punished by lashes and red-hot iron chains, according to Herodotus, who stated that the engineers responsible were also executed. Ultimately, a new, more stable construction was erected with better support against wind and currents. The now king of the Persians and Medes watched as his huge army crossed the bridges, taking 7 days. 30 independent Greek states formed a congress. Their rivalries were laid aside to defend their homeland as a union. Sparta was given high command on land, while their Athenian brothers guarded the sea. The sea battle of Artemisium and the land battle of Thermopylae were fought simultaneously. The Greeks were hopelessly outnumbered in both fights, but made the Persians pay for every meter of land. In the end, the Persians ultimately won the terrains at a very high cost. However, the sacrifices of Spartan hoplites and Greek ships slowed down the Persian advance significantly, and the allied contingents were not virtually destroyed. The outcome at Thermopylae resulted in the entirety of Boeotia falling to Xerxes. Attica was also left open. The remnant population of Athens was removed, with help from the remaining allied fleet, to Salamis. The Peloponnesian allies then commenced to create a defensive line across the Isthmus of Corinth with a wall, and by demolishing the roadway from Megara, as they abandoned Athens to the Persians. Thus, Athens fell to the Persians, and the scant Athenian survivors who had barricaded themselves on the Acropolis were ultimately defeated. After this, Xerxes commanded the destruction of the ancient city, something the Greeks would never forget nor forgive. The tide of this conflict would turn at Salamis, where most of the Greek resistance was organized. All of Xerxes' advisors, except Artemisia of Halicarnassus, urged the king to attack. Artemisia made the argument that the Greeks would surrender without further fighting, as their provisions and supplies would eventually crumble. Xerxes, however, ultimately ordered the fleet to engage the Greek navy at the island of Salamis, and the first greatly recorded naval battle in history occurred. The Greek fleet could only muster less than 400 triremes, while the Achaemenid Empire commanded twice as many. The Athenian commander Themistocles lured the enemy into narrow waters. The Persians sought to block the entry to free waters, but in their attempt hindered their own movement and strength. Seeing this, the Greco alliance took the initiative and both rammed and boarded as many enemy vessels as possible. It was a disaster for Xerxes, as 300 of his ships were lost. With sea superiority lost, the possibility that the Greeks would now destroy the bridges on which the Persians marched across earlier in spring became real. The King of Kings decided to return home with parts of the army, as many soldiers contracted dysentery due to a lack of food. Back home, Xerxes I planned great infrastructural projects. He sought to even surpass his father in this regard. It's very likely that monumental buildings were intended to distract from the failure in Greece. The state treasury was therefore further drained, and it became clear that the golden age of the Achaemenid Empire had reached its end. In late summer of the following year, the deciding Battle of Plataea was yet another setback for Persian territorial expansion. The remaining royal army was destroyed, and most of its high command killed by the largest Greek army ever assembled. All Persian ambitions to control all of Greece were virtually destroyed forever, and the Greeks now thought of themselves as superior. They even conducted counteroffensives in the following year. It's fair to say that Xerxes was probably the weakest Persian king until this point, and his final years didn't do much to redeem him. Xerxes I ruled until 465 BC, when he was assassinated in a conspiracy by his subordinate Artabanus, who also killed the king's heir, Darius. Xerxes' third-born son managed to claim the throne and became Artaxerxes I.